next section we're going to be looking at is part 3 for continuing to look at the Mao's rise to power. Okay, so as we saw in the last lecture, we saw that the GMD and the CCP kind of came together, right? And so now we see the creation of the first United Front. That should ring a little bit of a bell from last semester when we looked at Japan. So we have the CCP forming an alliance with the GMD. There are some ideological difference, but they kind of set it aside because it's like the warlords are a bigger problem, and it's kind of like we got to take care of that, right? That's even worse, than what we think of each other. The communists believed, though, the main motivation for the communists joining this alliance was that a communist revolution would never be achieved unless they defeated and kicked out the warlords, or defeated the warlords and kicked out the imperialists or the foreign powers. In 1924, the GMD and the CCP formed the first United Front. The formation of this alliance was very beneficial to the CCP and the GMD too, but the Communist Party went from having 57 members in 1921 to 58,000 in 1927. For the GMD, they also saw the support increase as well. Your book does not give the numbers, but just know both parties increased. The GMD established military academies. Well, one specific military academy, and which was left by Xiang, who provided a military force to support the political aims of the GMD. So just keep in mind that this guy named Xiang, he's going to play a big role in all of this, okay? So after the death of Sun, so just know that he dies. Okay, your book doesn't specify why the leader of the the GMD dies, but just know that he dies, and so that military guy, Xiang, comes in and he becomes the leader of the United Front. The thing with Xiang is that he is very anti-communist, and he was not very down for the get down with the commies, right? Despite the fact that they were forming an alliance against the warlords. And so politically, he was very suspicious of the CCP. And so Sun's idea to unite China against the warlords was put in place, despite the fact that Xiang doesn't really trust the CCP. But, out of respect, I guess I would say that they implemented his plan to unite China. This was known as the Northern Expedition, where more than 100,000 men left the Guangzhou, Sao, I think that's how you say it. I don't know. I'm so sorry. In May 1926, with 3 targets in mind: Fujian, Jiangxi, and Nanjing. So meanwhile, Mao was becoming more active within the GMD and the CCP in Shanghai. So this is where we start to see a little bit more of Mao, right? In 1926, he returned to organize peasant groups to support the United Front campaign and organize against the warlords. So he's actively recruiting for the United Front. Among the peasants, Mao was seen as their leader, right? Because he's the one interacting with the peasants and kind of hearing them out. And so eventually this leads to Mao playing a big role down the line in the Chinese Communist Party, okay? So the Northern Expedition happens, that plan is implemented, right? And led by Xiang. So they make advancements against the warlords, and the GMD and the CCP are in a position to basically take these regions away from the warlords, Nanjing and Shanghai. Well, part of the success did come from the military action led by Xiang, sorry. It also has to do with the coalitions that they made, or the deals that they made with some of the warlords. They're like, you know what, just settle down, step down, and just kind of like let us do our thing and help us out, and you'll be good. You'll be left alone. But also the CCP played a big, a faction of the United Front was having success in their communist activism in the countrysides and in the cities, and kind of bringing in recruits to defeat the warlords, which led to the United Front having some greater success. But despite all of this success, Xiang, again, like I told you guys in the last slide or so, was very anti-communist and believed communist members and saw them as a threat, and believed that their actions could, upset any middle-class support that the GMD had. So this is what happens next. White Terror, 1927. Chiang wanted to reassert his authority within the GMD, and to do so, he turned on the communist members in the United Front. with the support of the warlords, the landlords, secret societies, criminal organizations, and the Western groups, the West, the United States, the British, all of that. They used military violence to basically purge out, right? Kick out all the communists out of the United Front, kick out the communists out of the GMD, within Shanghai, Wuhan, and Hunan. And this led to union members, communists, and peasants associated, or just even kind of having any leftist ideals being attacked and killed, tortured by the thousands, right? And so this moment in history in China is known as the White Terror, and it collapses the United Front, right? So there's two United Fronts. This is the first one. Eventually, we'll get to the second United Front where they try this again, but again, it collapses, and it's once again Chiang's fault because he turns on the communists. Soon after, Chiang established a nationalist government in Nanjing, which marked the beginning of a civil war in China with the CCP basically and the GMD fighting one another, and Mao as one of the leaders during that for the CCP during that civil war within China. Next one. So this White Terror, right? They're finding all the communists and whatever. And so you have communists fleeing the area. So they flee. The CCP retreats forces into the mountains of Jiangxi, which is Soviet territory at the time. There's a population of about 1 million. And it's important to know why there's a big population in the area because it helps the recruitment, right? But the Red Army, the USSR's army, had established a base there and developed a strong guerrilla force resistance to the extermination campaign that the GMD was putting forth. So this Comintern Pact, the pro-Moscow groups and in the CCP believe that the best approach to kind of just regroup and start this revolution within the Communist Party would be to have just the workers from the big cities kind of lead the movement. But Mao was like, no, I don't think that's right. I think we can achieve this movement by having the peasants lead the way. And you have to understand where he's coming from because remember, Mao had previously in the last slides been working with the peasants and recruiting them and actually spent a lot of time with them. And so he knows what they're all about, right? And so he believes that they're capable enough to lead this. This led to Mao not listening to the orders of Moscow, which is like the capital of the USSR, the communists in Russia, which instructed him to basically start recruiting in bigger cities. But Mao was like, no. I'm going to the rural towns. I'm going to talk to the peasants. I'm going to recruit them. So Mao's position on the future communist revolution became clearer under his 1928 land law, where Mao would take that's supposed to say land, take land from landlords and then give them to the peasants. I'll correct that in your notebook. I don't know why that says law. And then the Fujian incident, 1930. During his time in Jiangxi, Mao went against his rivals where he tortured and executed rebels who were plotting against him, suspected of supporting other potential leaders within the party, or just people who would betray the movement, right? So where we see a separation between Mao and just Castro, maybe not in this year, right? Because we saw some of the brutality under in this year, is just more intense. It's more intense. But it was all done in the name of making this party survive under this intense situation, right? Next one. So while the GMD was, the official government of China, it was still weakened by the Japanese invasion. So all of this is happening, and Japan is still a thing. Japan is still coming in and taking all of these regions, right? And so eventually you see the invasion of Manchuria in 1931. Part of the reason for this is because basically Chiang was their leader was more concerned in putting effort and resources and money and time and men into crushing the communists in China rather than fighting a foreign invader in their region. So they're like, you know what? Yes, Japan is bad, and yes, they are taking our land, but we hate the communists even more, so we're going to go after them, which is why China lost Manchuria, right? So in 1934, Chiang surrounds Jiangxi Soviet region in the hopes to starve out the CCP and to kind of, eventually kill them. The plan was to build a defensive fortification to strengthen their army as they hunted down the CCP. This led to heavy defeats by the communists. The communists were being slaughtered, basically, and they abandoned their tactic of guerrilla warfare style, right, methods. Mao was demoted because he was not seen as effective. So he was demoted from his leadership. As the GMD continued to hunt down the CCP was forced to retreat in the face of extermination. 100,000 troops fled from Jiangxi Soviet and headed to Yan'an and Shanxi. This retreat was known as the Long March, a journey that was about 7,000 miles. That's a lot. I don't know how I can put that in the context of the United States, but it's very, very far. So the march took more than a year because, I mean, 7,000 miles is a really far away thing, guys. And provided the CCP, though, with an inspiring tale. The idea of like, oh my God, all these communist soldiers went from this one part of China to another part and traveled 7,000 miles, and they did it, and they were brave, and like, you know, it just shows the resilience, right? So it portrayed the CCP as resilient people against the odds, you know, fleeing extermination and traveling 7,000 miles on foot, you know, hiding from the GMD. And so it just shows that, right? But the reality is that the march was harder than what they made it seem. There was thousands of troops who lost their lives, and only about 20,000 of them. So they lost more than half of the people who went on this march. So it's kind of like, you know, yes, it was tough, and those people who did survive were resilient, but they lost over half of the troops that fled Jiangxi, right? But this is going to be used as propaganda in the future, and we'll look at that in class together. On January 1933, Mao made a comeback within the party and argued that the CCP should return to guerrilla warfare methods, and he then managed to outmaneuver his opponents and, you know, took control. There's another freaking typo. Took control of the First Front Army. Okay, so that's it for that. But before you go, there is a question in your notebook that I want you to answer. Okay, so Mao grew up with four main influences on his thinking, right? Japan, the ruling elites, Western powers, and the warlords. There's these four elements that exist within China that are influencing that. Mao's watching this happen as he's growing up, right? Reflecting on what we've looked at so far for this week, I want you to discuss in your notebook, there's a section right there, discuss how each part might have played a role in shaping his ideas and his ideology. Okay, I don't expect you to know everything, but we have been covering those four elements and how they all played a role in leading to this instability in China and to the rise of Mao. Okay, I need 5 sentences minimum. That's going to be part of your asynchronous grade. Okay, but I'm going to leave you with that.